So let's talk about the history of codes. Believe it or not, codes go back to 1772 BC. That's a really long time, over 4,000 years ago. First code was the Babylonian code of Hammurabi, and it was pretty scary. Okay, I don't know that I would want to be a builder. If we read what the code says, it says if a builder build a house for someone and complete it, he shall give him a fee of 2 things. So basically you're going to get paid. Okay, that's great. Y'all like that. Second, if a builder build a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built fall and kills its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. Luckily, we don't have codes like this that are quite that strict today. It goes on to say that if you kill the son, then your son will be killed. So basically, an eye for an eye is how it goes. If the building falls down and nobody gets hurt, you still are going to be responsible for paying to replace it. So there are some pretty strict rules there. And even in the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Hebrew Bible, it stipulates that you at least have to have parapets on your building. The thing that a parapet does is it keeps people from falling off the building. The other thing it can do is it can hide all the ugly stuff on a roof. Anybody ever been on a roof or noticed really ugly stuff on a roof? What kind of things do you see? Rooftop units, vents, all kinds of things that are not attractive. When I was doing buildings for O'Reilly's, I did one in North Carolina in a historic district. We had to make the O'Reilly's, you know how O'Reilly's look here, they're just a metal building basically. And there we had to actually make it fit to look like their other buildings in the historic district. The other thing we did, we had to make the parapet high enough that from a certain distance on the street, you could not see anything on the roof. Parapets serve many, many purposes, but in the Hebrew Bible, it served the purpose of not falling off the roof. So codes came in effect in the 1800s. And that was basically because of fire. Remember the Chicago fires? Probably heard about that in your history classes. And guess who insisted that we have these codes? Insurance companies. Because they were the ones that were having to pay out all the money for the damages that were caused, all the deaths that were caused. So insurance companies kind of got the ball rolling. And when I first started, the United States had multiple codes. Okay? We didn't have just one single code. You had the UBC code, you had the Southern Building Code, you had the IDC code. Depending on what part of the United States you were in, you used that code. They formed the International Code Council. So we kind of got rid of all those different codes, combined them all together, and now we're under one. And everything is put together by the International Code Council. And then our building code is the International Building Code, which you'll see is the IBC. Those of you that's in residential, what code did we work with? International Residential Code. There's also an existing building code. So if you're doing renovations to an existing building, the International Building Code, the first one was in 2000. They are housed in Washington, D.C. They are effective throughout the United States, like I said. And here's something that you need to be able to say word for word. The purpose of codes are to provide minimum standards for safety, health, and general welfare. That's the part I want you to know. So basically what we're saying is codes are the minimum. You can go beyond that, but again, you have to be careful going beyond because you're going to start adding money to projects that owners don't want, and then they are for life safety. So the building code covers lots of things. Some things that you may not even think about that it covers. It covers structures. That's pretty obvious. We all know that what holds the building up is pretty important. Okay? It covers placement, size, usage, wall assemblies. Remember we talked about some rated walls the other day. The code is going to tell you where you need to have those and what that rating needs to be. And then it's going to tell you how it needs to be constructed. Fenestrations. What is a fenestration? It's like a window opening or a door opening. So code is going to dictate that. Depending on, like, if this corridor out here was rated, which it probably isn't, we may not be able to have so much glass in that wall. It's going to tell you that. Egress. What is egress? Exiting. That is very, very important. Like our door here opens outward. That way, hopefully, how you get out of this building, every door should swing out. So that's the first thing I'm going to look at when you start doing your building is to make sure you have all your doors swinging in the right direction. If you don't, you're going to lose points. They all need to swing out. Except for things like office, they don't have to. It's based on the number of occupants and how to get out. Size, location of rooms. Sometimes it will dictate a room. For example, A lot of times, and it's not an absolute thing, but the elevator equipment room needs to be adjacent to the elevator, because what's in that elevator equipment room is what controls the elevator. So if you put that a distance away from the elevator, what have you just done? More money, because now we have longer runs, we have harder ways to get things through things, we have to make more penetrations, all kinds of things. So these are things that you got to think about. It makes sense, I think, stacking bathrooms. That way all your plumbing is in the same area. It also makes a lot of sense to back the men's and the women's up to each other, because you can share that chase to put all the plumbing in and your venting. So there are things like that that the code will have requirements on. Foundations, depending on where you're building, is going to affect the foundation. So at the beginning of the code book, it actually goes into a lot of site, climate. We have earthquake zones. So as an architect in Springfield, Missouri, I can design buildings and do things. But if I go to California to do a building, I can't, because I have to take a special test in California to get my license there. So again, that's going to be in the code book. Floor assemblies, roof assemblies, energy, the energy code. When I first started, we didn't, there was an energy code, but we really didn't do anything with it, and it wasn't all that big a deal. That all kind of got started in California, because they're kind of the leader. So now we do have energy codes. Stairs and halls, there are requirements for tread depth, riser height, handrails, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, site drainage, appliance, storage, depending on what you're storing. You could have hazardous materials. That's going to be a whole different ballgame than just a plain little storage area. Site drainage and storage, you can't just come into a piece of property and put a building and pave the whole piece of property. City of Springfield is not going to allow that. Runoff from rain. Okay, most of you that have lived in Springfield for very long, there are certain places in Springfield that when it rains a whole lot, the streets flood, because our system was not designed to have the capacity that it does now. They fixed a lot of that, but they do require that you have at least 20% green space on your site. Okay? That way it can help keep that runoff from going directly into the system. Appliances, there are requirements. Kitchen equipment has a lot of requirements. You have to have hoods, you have to have sprinklers, you have to have ventilation. Lighting, again, we talked about that the other day. You have to have certain light levels in spaces, depending on what the use of that space is. Occupancy rules. Have you ever noticed when you go into a restaurant or something, it says maximum occupancy? Bars are notorious for exceeding that, and they can get shut down. We calculate occupancy. You guys will do some occupancy calculations in your code search. Typically, if we calculate an occupancy and it comes out to be like 19.2, have to round that up to 20. We don't round it down to 19. Even though we don't have a 0.2 person, still have to count that as an improvement, because we always want to be on the high side. Swimming pools, again, there are all kinds of special regulations, and a lot of that will come in your zoning, but the IBC does cover a lot of things. IBC has a small section on parking. Mostly when we do our parking, we use our zoning ordinance for that. So there's a lot of specialty things. Fire codes. When you submit a set of drawings to the city for a building, say like this building here, it also goes to the fire department. Why do you think? They need to know that if there's a fire in this building, how they get here. Okay, if this building is locked at night, what do they need? Keys. And how do they get keys? A Knox box. Okay, and I don't know where the Knox box is for this building, but anyway, the city does. The fire department does. Okay, and it's a box that they have a key for, and they can open that box and they can get into this building. Because what you don't want to have happen, lots of times fire alarms will go off for some minimal reason or accidentally. So you don't want the city coming in and busting out your front door trying to get into your building. I talked about earthquake, hurricane, flood, tsunamis, all of that is all mentioned in the code. And again, we don't have to deal with some of that, but some of it we do. Specific building use, like again, if you're storing flammable substances or if you have multi-occupancy residential type stuff, you can see that the code is all encompassing. Sometimes you can get things grandfathered in. Like when I worked for the company that we did historic preservation, some of the buildings by code, you're really supposed to have an elevator. But because of the historic significance of the building and the cost, it wasn't feasible to do that. So sometimes you can get things grandfathered in. And basically how we would get around that is that as long as we provided exactly what was on those upper floors on the main level, we could get by without having an elevator. So again, there are ways to get things grandfathered in. Specifications on components. Again, not only do we do a drawing that shows everything, but we also have a big spec book that we'll look at here in a couple weeks or a week or so. And it gets very specific into what materials are that go into our project. For example, I know I want to have gypsum board on my wall. Like I told you the other day, there's all kinds of gypsum board. So I can, in my specification, narrow that down where when the contractors bid it, they're all bidding the same thing. Because what I don't want to do is leave that very vague, and then contractor A puts in $2,000, contractor B puts in $10,000. Because he's not sure what I'm doing. He's taking a chance that I'm doing what he thinks I'm doing. So again, those specifications help make things more accurate and meet code. Installation methodologies, again, it's going to talk about fire-rated wall construction, what that has to be. So it's going to give us this kind of definition. Minimum and maximum room sizes, number of exits. If we had this room set up to where we had 50 or more people in it, we would have 2 exits. But because of the number of people in here, the way this room is laid out, we don't have to have. So again, those kind of things. Sometimes they'll even say that a contractor has to have so much experience, or they have to be certified, or they have to be licensed to do certain things. The code will help define this. If you have like a high structure, you got to think about aircraft. Okay, I did a lot of hospital work. We always had heliports for the helicopters. So we had to work with the aviation people to make sure we have proper signage, proper flags, proper lighting, all of that sort of thing, so that they not crash into buildings that we don't want them to crash.
This concludes the video on the history of building codes and the IBC or International Building Code. Next, we will talk about accessibility codes.